So in the, we'll start with our motivation, and in the prayer that we say at the beginning, we wish that all sentient beings be freed from the cycle of existence that is pervaded by aging, sickness, and death. And we chant it very quickly, and I wonder sometimes if we really think about what we're saying, and if we really feel, oh, I'm in a cycle of existence under the control of afflictions, perturbed by aging, sickness, and death that I cannot control, that I'm subject to no matter whether I like it or not. And, when we say aging, sickness, and death, does it bring to mind renunciation of samsara, or does it bring to mind panicky fear? If it brings to mind panicky fear, then our mind's very stuck in, craving for the happiness of only this life. And it suffers very much because of that. Yet when our scope is broadened and we hear aging, sickness, and death, and we think, oh, I want to be free of cyclic existence, then that gives us a lot of energy and motivation to put the teachings into practice. So let's try and have that energy and motivation, not only because we're subject to aging, sickness, and death, but because all beings are subject to them. And until we free ourselves from the grasping it to a true existence, we'll continue to be under the power of afflictions, getting born, aging, getting sick and dying without choice, without control. And then seeing that all sentient beings are in that same situation. And seeing that there's no good reason to cherish ourselves more than others. In fact, there's no I or my to be attached to who's the owner of the suffering to start with. Then let's care for other living beings as much as we now care for ourselves and want to attain full awakening in order to lead them to freedom. And so with this motivation, we'll listen to Nagarjuna's teachings that he gave to the king. So we're just at the beginning of chapter 4 of Nagarjuna's text. And so he's just got finished giving the king a lot of practical advice about how to accumulate merit, how to accumulate wisdom, the different causes the king can create, and the different results that they bring on the path. And so he's not just talking to the king, he's also talking to us. Oh, wait a minute. And so the new chapter that we're starting is called Royal Policy Instructions on the Practices of a Monarch. And so here Nagarjuna is going to give some practical advice for leaders. So this is what I was saying this morning about applying the Dharma that we know to the situation in society around us. So Nagarjuna starts this chapter off in a very interesting way because he's talking to the king, and the king is like all powerful, kind of, in ancient India, very powerful, although it's quite interesting. Aryadeva in the 400 reminds us that a king only has power when other people accept them as the king, as the ruler. If people don't accept you as the leader, then you're not a leader and you have no power. Yeah? So it's a dependent arising relationship here. Mm-hmm. So, Nagarjuna is very humble, and yet, he knows so much more than the king, but, you have to be delicate around the king. Kings, I guess, tend to have big egos. And so he approaches the king very, very humbly and says what the king knows, but nobody says to him otherwise. Yeah. So we'll start with verse 301, and you'll see how he approaches the king. He's really quite skillful. Okay. Anyway, verse 301 says, if the king acts in a way that contradicts the Dharma or does something that does not make sense, most of his subjects still praise him. Hence, it is hard for him to know what is appropriate and what is not. So why do most of the subjects and the ministers still praise the king, even when he bungles things and does something unethical? Well, because they don't know if they speak truthfully, if the king will accept it, or if he'll fly off the handle in a rage and punish them, cut off their head, or, who knows what. So, being afraid that if they're honest, they may suffer dire results, then they flatter him and they say all sorts of sweet things. Yeah? And so this is not just with the king, this is with most people in a leadership or authority position. Sometimes we're honest with them, but usually we either are angry and tell them off, or we flatter them in order to get something we want, like a good grade or a recommendation or a job or something like that. Okay, so it's interesting how, we're not afraid of them imprisoning us or cutting off our heads, so sometimes we'll be very caustic, but other times we'll be very, what do they call it, a brown nose, ingratiating, to the king. So it's very hard if you're a leader to get accurate information, because you need the other people who are in contact with the rest of the kingdom or the rest of the organization to tell you what's going on. And if they don't tell you what's going on, or they lie to you to flatter you, then it becomes very difficult for you to be a good leader because you don't have accurate information. Yeah? So it's, Nagarjuna is going to give the king some feedback, and he says, he's going to say here, that it's, out of his affection for the king, and for the welfare of the kingdom. Yeah, so even if he has to say something that's unpleasant, he's trusting the king enough to know that the king realizes it's for his own benefit and the benefit of the kingdom. Yeah. So, you find this in workplaces a lot, don't you? That people often, they don't speak up, they keep things hidden because they're afraid of getting blamed or afraid their bosses won't like them or their colleagues won't like them or whatever, so they just kind of be quiet and they go along with stuff that isn't very good, and and then the organization can't grow, and you wind up having a very strange feeling in the office because there's a lot of elephants in there that nobody talks about. Yeah, because they're afraid that the big boss is going to get upset. Yeah, so we need to speak up in a kind way. Speaking up doesn't mean we have to be a tattletale or we have to insult anybody. It just means we share information that might be valuable. Okay? And then similarly, if you're in the leadership position, to be able to hear the information without getting angry. Yeah, so it's a given. It depends on both parties. Okay? So verse 302 and then 303, if it is even difficult to say something beneficial but unpleasant to others, how can I, a monk, hope to do so to you, the monarch of a large realm? So if it's even hard to say something beneficial that might be unpleasant for somebody else's ears to an ordinary person, then it's going to be more uncomfortable to say it to the king, to the prez, or whatever, okay? So, do we find it hard to speak truthfully even though sometimes it's unpleasant to somebody else? Yeah. And so if it's that way with ordinary people, it's going to be even more so with somebody who we feel has some authority over us or, can influence us. So also here, of course, Nagarjuna isn't, he's not afraid of the king. He's beyond that kind of fear. But he's speaking in a very humble, respectful way to the king, to kind of get him on board here. Okay, and then 303 says, but because of my affection for you and also due to my compassion for beings, I myself will tell you what is quite helpful, but not very pleasant. So he's clarifying his motivation. It's out of affection for the king, compassion for the kingdom. And he's going to say what's helpful, and he's giving the king a heads up that it might not be as ego-pleasing as everybody else, what everybody else says to you. But it will definitely be more helpful to you than what other people say to you. Okay? And if you're a leader who actually wants to lead, it shouldn't matter whether it's pleasant or unpleasant. If you're a leader who just is ego-inflated, then you only want to hear the pleasant stuff. Okay, but Nagarjuna wants to speak of what's of temporal benefit and then also what is of ultimate benefit for the king and the kingdom. Okay, so in general, the Buddha said that we shouldn't criticize others when we're in an afflictive mental state. Because if we do, our motivation is pretty skewed and we're likely to say a lot of things that are inaccurate or, disconcerting to the other people. But here, Nagarjuna is speaking with a calm mind and a compassionate mind. And he is, taking the risk to speak honestly, because being a Buddhist practitioner, he's not really afraid if the king kills him or not. He's ready for death. And also, I think he's already taught the king 300 verses. So if the king doesn't trust him by now, then everything's been wasted. So I think they must have some kind of good communication by now. Okay. Then 304, the Blessed One, the Buddha, said that at the right time one should say what is true, gentle, meaningful, and useful to one's disciples out of love. Hence, I tell you these things. Okay, so again, clarifying his motivation. And he's affirming, that he's a teacher, the king is the student, and that they have a harmonious relationship. And so due to this, he's going to give him some advice, because he trusts the king will listen well and pay attention. Okay, so he's going to speak what's true, what's kind, and what's meaningful. And so should we, whenever we speak to anybody, be they a leader or an ordinary person, to speak what's true, what's kind, and what's meaningful. Yeah, with a good motivation. So you can see here that there has to be a special relationship between Nagarjuna as the teacher and the king as the disciple. Yeah, that there's a relationship of trust, because Nagarjuna is trusting his disciple well enough to know that he's not just going to scream and yell and call him names and throw things. And the disciple, the king, is trusting his teacher well enough to know that the king is going to tell him what's truthful and what he needs to hear, even though it may not be pleasant. Okay? So it's interesting for us to check in our relationships with our spiritual mentors. To what extent are we willing to listen to advice that may not be particularly ego-pleasing? Or do we only want to hear the nice advice from our teacher, like, you're the most wonderful student I've ever had. You're the most intelligent student in this group. You are, blah, 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 blah. I mean, that's what we want, isn't it? And, how do we react when we hear something like, you didn't behave so well in that situation. There's some things you need to work on here. Do we listen? Or even it's not some feedback like that, even if our teacher tells us something that we don't, asks us to do something we don't want to do. Yeah, do we all of a sudden, I can't do that, I don't want to do that, what's my excuse number 437,399? I've got to present that to my teacher because my teacher told me what I didn't want to hear. So, sometimes I make an excuse, sometimes I just say nod and say yes, and then I go off to another teacher who hopefully will tell me what I want to hear. And if that teacher doesn't tell me what I want to hear, then I go to another teacher. And then I finally, I just keep frequenting all these different teachers until I hear what I want to hear, so I can do what I want to do and say my teacher told me to do it, without being responsible for making our own decision and without admitting that we aren't following our teacher's instructions. And I must say, without much consideration for our teachers and their time. So in India, I met quite a number of people that were that were like that. They kind of collected a lot of different advice from a lot of different teachers. Yeah, and then the teacher said what they wanted to hear. Now I'm going to go do that. Okay, so 305, if you remain steadfast while you listen to a true statement that is spoken without anger, then you will accept what you hear as if it were pure water that cleanses you. Okay, so if your mind is steady, if you're not super emotional, you're not an emotional yo-yo, you have some mental stability, then when you hear a true statement that isn't spoken that is spoken without anger, even though sometimes it may be spoken rather forcefully, it's not with anger, because we can speak forcefully, but without being angry. Yeah, then you will accept what you hear, and you treat it as like pure water that is cleansing away your defilements. So you really listen to the advice and take it to heart because you know it's good for you. Mm-hmm. Even if it's not particularly what you feel like doing. Yeah. And then 306, realizing that what I tell you is helpful in this context and others, implement it for your own sake and also for the sake of the world. Okay, so really see that what I'm saying is helpful and put it into practice for your own benefit and for the benefit of everybody in the kingdom. Okay, so remain steadfast, listen well, check it out. You're not expected to be a blind follower that just, says, aye, aye, Sergeant. You're expected to listen to the advice, think about it, and if it makes sense, put it into practice. If it doesn't make sense, go back and question your teacher about it. Or if you're in a situation, at work, you get some instructions, it doesn't make sense, go to your boss and explain why it doesn't make sense. And you don't have to be exasperated, you don't have to be angry, and you don't have to talk behind the boss's back for 5 days before you go and ask. You can just politely go, and chances are your boss will appreciate it. Yeah. You made a face. You don't think your boss will appreciate? Okay. And I think it's quite important. Interestingly, after our morning discussion and about the medicine Buddha's vow to help women, I was reading an article about a man who worked as a trader on Wall Street for 8 years, and how he said there was so much bonding that the men on Wall Street do over belittling women and talking about women's body parts and like that in really crude kind of, locker room style. Yeah, and how he, when he first went there, he felt uncomfortable, but he smiled or he laughed because that's what you have to do to be part of the group. And definitely as a trader on Wall Street, if you're going to advance, you have to curry the favor of the executives that are higher than you. And so he felt like, even though these comments were being made about women that he thought were disgusting, he kept his mouth closed because it could impinge on his successful career in Wall Street. Because if one of the executives found what he said, speaking truthfully, offensive because he was going against the good old boys club and their way of bonding, then it would affect his career long term. But now, many years later, not being on Wall Street anymore, he looks back and he has a lot of regret for not speaking up in those kind of situations. Yeah, and so, it could be, things about women, it could be gender discrimination, racial discrimination, religious discrimination, or where you go pee-pee discrimination. But to be able to voice something when the prevailing culture is bonding over, mistreating another group or another person, yeah, and to have the guts to go in and say politely but nicely, this is what's happening. I don't feel comfortable. I don't think, in a company or organization of our stature, that people should be interacting like this and speaking this way about others. Yeah? And it's truthful, and yet we're so scared, aren't we? So scared. So Nagarjuna is really saying, you have to overcome that. And actually the person who's listening has to be able to listen well.
I've been around people who speak in that way with racially, sexually, like you talked about. And if you speak up against people like that, eventually you find yourself surrounded by people who don't accept that because you're not in that group anymore. And the people that agree with you are drawn to you. And then all of a sudden you're in a group where that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
And we're in a society where we're changing now from these things being the norm. And so it's a good time to be speaking up.
Yeah. So that's very nice. If you speak up, the people who continue with that behavior may not like you, but you're going to be surrounded by all the other people who also don't like that behavior, who want to relate to each other in a much better way. Yeah, and especially now, since it's, some people may rail against being politically correct, but I think politically correct is going along with things, like sexism and so forth, racism, bigotry, without speaking up, because you're afraid of what the person's going to say. Yeah, and so I think, speaking up is good. It's necessary. And then you really see where people are truly at. You really see who's really a friend and who's not. Okay, so Nagarjuna is saying, the advice I give is going to help you in this life and future lives. It'll help you in terms of your Dharma practice. It'll help you in terms of running the kingdom. So, with a calm mind, please listen. Then the first advice that Nagarjuna gives to the king, is not build up your military. Okay? And it's not build a wall to keep your enemies out. Yeah. And it's not some kind of, crazy kind of thing. The first advice is increase your generosity. Yeah? It's the first advice Nagarjuna gives. He doesn't say, get together with all your cronies and get rid of all the people who might, challenge your power. He doesn't say that. He says, increase your generosity. Imagine that. So he says to the king, if you do not give away to supplicants, people who are asking for things, if you do not give away to supplicants the wealth you gain through previous generosity, then due to your greed and lack of gratitude, you will not obtain that wealth again. Okay, so if people come and they ask you, they need things, if you don't give away the wealth that you have, and how come you have this wealth? Because in previous lives you were generous. Yeah, because generosity is the cause of wealth. So he's saying to the king, in a previous life, you created a ton of good karma through being generous. That's why you have your wealth now. If you don't use this wealth to help other sentient beings now, then you're just increasing your stinginess and your attachment. And those are going to be the causes of you being impoverished in future lives. Okay, so due to your greed and lack of gratitude, you will not obtain that wealth again. Because generosity is the cause of wealth, stinginess is the cause of poverty. We usually think stinginess is the cause of wealth, because if I give it away, I won't have it. So I'll have more wealth if I'm stingy and attached and miserly. Yeah, that's the way we usually think. Yeah, and we usually think that poverty is the result of generosity, because if I give it away, then I won't have it, and then I'll be poor. So better that I don't give it away and I keep it for myself, and then that's how I'll be rich. And so here's a very good example. Last week when we talked about in the Friday class about the kind of ignorance that misunderstands karma and its effects, this is a good example of it. Yeah, the mind that says generosity is the cause of stinginess, a cause of poverty, and stinginess is the cause of wealth. A person has it completely upside down. Okay? So he's warning the king, it's not just if you don't give now that maybe people will say that you're stingy and it'll affect your reputation, but it'll mean that you're going to be born poor in the future. So even though he gave all these teachings about karma in the first 300 verses, it's coming again. How many times in this text we see there's certain themes that Nagarjuna is bringing up again and again? One of them is truth. One of them is generosity. Yeah? Those are two at least. There's more as well. But these come up again and again. And then 308, in this life, workers will not bear your provision without receiving their wages. But a lowly beggar, though not paid wages, bears 100-fold good qualities to your future life. Okay, so usually, if somebody works for us, and carries our stuff or transport our things, they expect their wages, and if we don't pay them, then they will not work for us. Okay? So we pay them, they give us their service. Yeah, it's a reciprocal agreement. Here he's saying, but a lowly beggar who is asking you for something and not giving, there's no overt reciprocity, because he's just saying, give me something, I'm poor. In actual fact, that person, will carry to your future life, carry in quotations, to your future life, zillions of good qualities that you wouldn't otherwise have. Why? Because due to the kindness of the beggar giving you the opportunity to be generous, then you create, King, the good karma, so that in the future lives you will have plentiful possessions and wealth. Okay? So, if you're a businessman, it's like, okay, somebody carries my stuff, I pay them a wage, fine. But a beggar is asking me for something and they're not doing anything for me. Why should I give to them? And Nagarjuna is saying, actually, they're doing much more for you than the person who paid the wage, because they're giving you the opportunity to be generous and create this kind of good karma. Okay. So the Buddha spoke about generosity. He speaks about it a lot. And maybe the first practice he gives to the king. Why? Well, first of all, because generosity is comparatively easy. Yeah, because everybody in society thinks generosity is good, or at least theoretically they think generosity is good. And all religions talk about being generous, don't they? Yeah, they all talk about generosity. And they all talk about helping others. And secular people who have no religion also appreciate generosity. So it's a very good initial practice to, to prescribe for people entering the path who want a good way to create merit. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to be rich in order to be generous. Yeah, the thing that is the generosity is your motivation. It has to be a generous motivation, not a self-serving motivation. The amount you give is whatever you feel like, whatever resonates within you, according to your financial situation and according to the needs of the other person, or according to just how you feel that day. The amount is up to you, but the thing that makes it generosity is our motivation. Okay. Now, this doesn't mean that if you're a millionaire, you say, well, I have a generous motivation and I'll give $10. Yeah, if you have the means to be of benefit, then give more. If you don't have the means to be of benefit, that isn't the issue. You can still practice generosity. Okay? Yeah, because they tell the cute story of in old Tibet. Yeah, then you made offerings to teachers. If you received a teaching, received an initiation. And initiations always involve visualization and stuff like that. So you always made an offering. And tea was one very nice offering that you made. If you've ever seen Tibetan tea, it's a brick of tea. It tastes terrible. But they love it. Okay? But so there's this story about one Lama gave this empowerment, and then afterwards people are coming up and making offerings, and one old man comes up and he has a brick of tea, but he says, well, during the empowerment, you asked me to visualize this and visualize that and visualize the other thing, so now I'm going to ask you to please visualize me giving you this block of tea. And he put it back in his coat and went off with it. Yeah. So, tit for tat, huh? Okay. So like I mentioned earlier, for a bodhisattva, they are just so delighted when somebody says, please give me something. Yeah? And although, in the teachings, it talks a lot about giving material things, there's also the generosity of fearlessness, where we protect others from danger, the generosity of love, where we console people, give them counseling, and the generosity of the Dharma, whereby we share the teachings with others. And I think also, maybe, would it be the generosity of love? I think it's also giving respect to people. especially people who are poor, because they often suffer from a lack of material, but society usually looks down on them and treats them rather awfully. And if you can show them respect, that often means much more to them than the material gift that you made. So one man, when I was teaching in Seattle in the class there, he told me that he was in Berkeley one weekend and walking down the street. And in Berkeley, California, there are always tons of street people. And there was one woman, with her head down and, her bowl. And he pulled out $1 or $2, something, and he gave it to her with both hands. He didn't just throw it in the bowl. He gave it to her with both hands and looked her in the eye and said, "I don't have very much with me, but I really want to give this to you." And that woman's eyes filled with tears because he connected with her and respected her as a human being. Yeah. It wasn't the amount of money. It was that he respected her. And I find in the work that, we do with the inmates, that that's the thing that touches them the most, is that we respect them. Because usually in their situation, their family is very often upset with them. Some of their families don't speak to them again. Some families do, but some don't. The guards don't respect them. The other prisoners don't respect them. They feel forgotten by society, and they are. They're put in prison, lock them up, throw away the key. And, we treat them with regular, plain old manners, the way you treat anybody, and we do this without even thinking twice. Yeah, when I go into a prison, I don't think, oh, I have to, make sure I respect them. It's like, this is the way I treat anybody. But when you treat prisoners like that, incarcerated people like that, they're all of a sudden quite, wow, what's going on here? Because that's not the usual kind of contact they have with other people. Yeah. And we know that often how somebody treats us is much more important than the gift that they give us, isn't it? Yeah. If somebody gives you a Christmas present and they just kind of, here's your Christmas gift, even though it may be the keys to a, who knows what, a new car or whatever, that's very different than even somebody, wraps this up in decorated paper and says, here's your Christmas gift, It's like how you treat somebody is very important. Okay. It's also important when we practice generosity, to practice ethical conduct, because ethical conduct is the cause for a higher rebirth. Generosity is the cause for wealth. If we intend to practice the Dharma, we need both a higher rebirth and we need the material wherewithal to be able to practice, because if we're completely impoverished, it's going to be very difficult to practice because you're just trying to stay alive. So if we just create the good karma of generosity, then in our next life we may receive lots of wealth, but we won't be in a human form to be able to enjoy the teachings. An example is our kitties. Okay? Our kitties are, they have it better than some human beings on this planet. Yeah, and they are coddled, and they are fed, and they are cuckoo, what do you say? Coochie-coo, yeah, they're coochie-cooed, And You know, they're praised as being adorable. Yeah, we hold them up. We, um, but, yeah, and we invite them to the teachings because when there aren't so many people, we have the teachings in the other building. We make sure they're all there so that they get the Dharma imprint. But they can't appreciate being in a monastery. Yeah, it's like, you know, the teachings, they sleep through the teachings, and it's in one ear and out the other. And, yeah. But they, so you can see, they have what's called, unfortunate propelling karma because they're in an unfortunate rebirth. A body like that doesn't give you the opportunity to practice. But they have very excellent completing karma. Completing karma is what does the general conditions in the rebirth because they have so much love and affection and good food and everything else. Okay? So that's an example of practicing generosity but not ethical conduct. If you practice ethical conduct but not generosity, then you may be born as a human being, but in a place where, where there's war, where you're impoverished, where, there's all sorts of things going on that make it quite difficult to practice. So we need to create for a precious human life many, many different kinds of conditions, different karmas, so that many conditions will come forth. Okay? They often say in the Tibetan monasteries that, because they often have lots of dogs around them, and the dogs around the monasteries suffer unbelievably. But they often say that they're monks who didn't keep their precepts very well. So they have some affiliation with the Dharma, but due to their impure ethical conduct, then they have a lower rebirth like that. Okay. If we practice generosity in a regular way, then we create a lot of good karma, and especially when we practice generosity with a group, because within a group, if you give to a group, then it's divided among all the members, and there's more chances that one of the members may be an Arya or a Bodhisattva, and in which case you're establishing a karmic link with that person who makes prayers for you and, wants to be able to lead you on the path. So, at the big teachings in India, for example, they offer water and tea and bread for breakfast. And so, when they have enough money, they offer these. And when I first went to Dharamsala, you didn't even get tea because everybody was so poor. But now they give, because they get more offerings. But the idea is that they always have a booth, and everybody goes and makes some donation of, some small amount, some big amount. The idea being that you're offering to this whole assembly of like 30,000 people, and for sure there's going to be some bodhisattvas and some aryas in there. So even if your offering is divided up and all they get is a penny, still you're making that karmic link, and the people who receive the offerings, are making dedication prayers for the people who keep them alive. So this is also what's going on with the prayers after lunch that we recite. They're made for the benefit of the people who offered the food to the Abbey, which in some cases is the people eating the food, and in some cases it's not. Okay. Then 309. Always keep your mind sublime and delight in sublime deeds. All sublime effects come from sublime actions. Okay, so this is a teaching in karma. Yeah? Always keep your mind sublime. In other words, keep a virtuous state of mind. Don't let your mind just get grouchy and complaining and bickering and, like that. Because when we do, we're self-sabotaging. We're the one who's going to experience the biggest problem from that state of mind. So always keep your mind sublime and delight in sublime deeds. And so, do good deeds, keep good ethical discipline, practice the Dharma, transform your mind, be generous, help others. And so keep your body and speech sublime too. And speech especially, because I was saying before, it's so powerful. If we really check up on our speech, we can be incredibly generous with our speech and create an incredible amount of good karma in terms of helping people who are upset with each other to reconcile, putting people who can work together well together so that they can work together on good projects, connecting good people. There's a lot of good we can do with our speech. Pacify people's unhappiness, console them, when they've been treated unfairly or whatever. Okay? So keep your mind sublime, delight in your own sublime deeds, and also rejoice in the good deeds of others. And then he says all sublime effects come from sublime actions. So when you create a cause, you act, because karma simply means action, you create that cause, then you get very good results. Okay, so then he's, now the second thing that he is going to instruct Nagarjuna to do is called training in vast actions and thoughts. And, the idea is that even though your present actions are quite modest, at least in your mind, think big. Okay? So this is the idea behind all these unshakable resolves that, we're limited beings right now, so what we can actually do, we do, it's limited, but we have a big mind. Because if we have a big mind, we'll eventually grow into our mind. If we have big aspirations, we'll eventually do them. If we say, I'm so little, I'm so incompetent, I can't have big aspirations, it's too much for me, then for sure, we'll never have big deeds either. Yeah. Because you have to be able to imagine something before you're able to do it. And you have to aspire for it before you go out and do it. Yeah, so no, whatever our state is now, we accept that. But with our mind, we have big aspirations, okay? So we want to aspire, especially to do far-reaching deeds for countless living beings. Yeah. And so, so like the 12 unshakable resolves of the medicine Buddha. I mean, some of them are like out in the universe, aren't they? They're kind of, if you think, how would it ever be possible to fulfill that? Yeah. But the thing is, for bodhisattvas, they're not so worried about, is this aspiration actually possible to fulfill? Because they know that just making the aspiration itself has a good effect on their mind. Because if we make big aspirations, then in the future, even we encounter a rather small situation where we can be of benefit, we're of benefit. Yeah, due to the fact that we've trained our mind through making these big aspirations. Yeah? Whereas if we don't do that, even we encounter a situation in which we could be of benefit without exerting much effort, because our mind isn't familiar and our mind is not aspiring to do such a thing, then we completely miss out on many opportunities to create a ton of merit and to benefit a ton of sentient beings. Okay? So the aspirations, the thoughts that we think with our mind are very, very important. Yeah? Even if we can't fulfill all of them. And so I really recommend as a practice before you go to bed at night, because they say that, if we go to bed with a virtuous mind, then our sleep becomes virtuous. If we go to sleep with a complaining, angry mind, then our sleep becomes non-virtuous. And we usually wake up in a bad mood to boot. Yeah. But if, right before you go to bed, if you're saying some mantra, if you do some meditation, if you dedicate the merit, to sentient beings, or you just sit and think, I often, when I lie down, because I'm usually tired when I lie down, it's like, oh, this feels so good. Then I think of people in war zones that can't go to sleep and feel safe. I go to sleep and I feel safe. I don't worry about what's going to happen when I'm asleep. And if I think of many people in this world living in war zones, they're in great danger when they go to sleep. Yeah? And I think of children, who go to sleep feeling they're without a protector, without any help. Yeah? And they're relying on their parents, who sometimes are the ones who are making the children's situation worse, or sometimes the parents want to help the children, but they're unable to themselves because of the situation they're in. Yeah? So I find just kind of thinking about this and having the thought to share, I often think, may all these people who live in war zones, may they feel safe. And may, everybody go to sleep and feel safe. Because if you don't feel safe in this world, it doesn't matter how much money you have, does it? Yeah? So, or you might say, may people who feel unloved, may all the people who feel unloved, feel loved. May they meet friends who, will be steadfast, good friends to them, who they can really communicate with. Yeah, so may all these people who feel unloved find, have love and have good relationships with the people they love, not having a stormy, dramatic relationship like you often find, Mm-hmm.
So when you say that, do you say it and then dedicate merit, or do you fall asleep saying that?
Well, you can think it and dedicate the merit, and if you fall asleep in the middle, that's okay. Yeah? Or you can finish, if you finish your dedication and then you continue falling asleep. Okay, so the first advice in terms of training in vast actions and thoughts, that Nagarjuna tells the king, is to establish magnificent monasteries, dharma centers, and educational institutions. Okay? He doesn't say build up your army, build up your intelligence service, have more spies, build up the FBI. he says, build monasteries, centers, and educational institutions. Yeah? Wouldn't that be wonderful? Could you think of living in a country where that was one of the foremost things that not only the ruler, the president or whatever, but also the people thought was important? That would be quite amazing. Yeah? I mean, whether you're Buddhist or not, to live in a place where people really value education and want all the kids from, this big on to have a good education. And the people who want to go to trade school to be able to do it, and the people who want to go to college to be able to do it without coming out with debts that it's going to take them their lifetime to pay off. Yeah? I think free education was one of the best things that, we started in Western society. And we need more of it. Okay, so verse 3:10, Nagarjuna says, establish glorious dharma sites and famed centers of the three jewels that have not even been imagined by weaker kings. Okay, so if you misinterpret this, you'll say, oh, build something big so that you'll be famous as a big benefactor and all the other kings will be jealous of you. No, that's not the motivation that Nagarjuna wants to encourage in the king. Okay. He is doing this. Why establish glorious dharma sites, and famed centers of the three jewels? Yeah, monasteries, dharma centers, and so on. You could not only construct the buildings, but you make it possible to fill those buildings with students, with monastics, with people who are going to get a good education, who are going to practice the Dharma well, who can teach the Dharma and ethical conduct to others, who can show a good example of ethical conduct to the rest of the population. So he's saying build these beautiful sites and fill them with people, fill them with Dharma texts, secular education, fine too. He's not just saying Buddhist education, but secular education. Have statues and painting, have the arts, the sciences, the crafts, and make it something glorious so that the society feels, wow, look what is important to us, and look where we can go and what we can engage in. Okay? So he's saying, if you build Buddhist learning centers, it will bring your country a lot of joy and happiness. And because you're creating good karma, then you won't have famine and drought and fires and floods and so forth, and war and, epidemic diseases and things like that. Yeah? And so, it's good to get everybody in the country involved in this. And if you as the king set these places up and you make the offerings to start them and to make it possible for people to live and study in them, then because you're the king, all the population is going to copy what you do. Yeah, and they're going to be proud to be your subjects, and they're going to become more virtuous, and then your kingdom, the affairs of the kingdom, will be much more harmonious. Yeah, and so, we see this so much now, don't we? How the leaders in the country act, whether they're the political leaders, business leaders, military leaders, how they act influences the whole feeling inside the country. And right now, because some people, I won't mention names, are speaking in a certain, way to stir up disharmony and prejudice and violence, then what do we have more of right now? Disharmony, prejudice, and violence. You know, whereas if the leaders, that's what he's telling the king here, you know, are funding educational institutions and monasteries and the arts and music and sciences, boy, you know, your kingdom's going to be great. People are going to, you know, have good educations. They'll be able to do a lot. Yeah, your kids are not going to be bored and get into drugs and start vandalizing people's homes to get the money for the drugs, because they'll be involved in arts and crafts and all sorts of other things instead, you know? So then you won't have to build as many prisons. Okay? So actually, you know, the big educational institutions in India, in, you know, the classical period, educational institutions like Odantapuri, Nalanda, Vikramasila, and so on, they were huge Buddhist centers and Buddhist monasteries, but they also taught arts, sciences, poetry, grammar, and they taught non-Buddhist subjects and some of the views of the non-Buddhists as well, because they were always debating with all these people. You know, there was such an incredible culture at that time of discussing and debating the nature of reality, yeah, that everybody had a place in these kind of educational institutions. Okay, so there's a story here, you know, that a previous Indian scholar, he became a siddha, who was, a siddha is like a yogi, a realized practitioner. And through a combination of reading the sutras and his own super knowledges, his clairvoyant powers, he found out that it was, that he was wondering what action was the most virtuous thing to do for his country. And so through these powers and reading the scriptures, he found out that it was to build monasteries and to enlarge the Sangha. And so in his next life, he was born as a wealthy king, and he built Vikramasila Monastery, and you know, which was on the par of Nalanda in ancient India, and filled it with people, you know, who were studying and practicing. Okay, and so similarly, Lama Atisha, you know, who was one of the great Indian sages who helped bring Buddhism to Tibet during the time of the second transmission. Before he went to India, before he went to Tibet from India, he spent a lot of time trying to restore monasteries and prevent them from deteriorating. And when he arrived in Tibet, he told Dromdonpa, who was his foremost disciple, that of all, the greatest of all virtues was building monasteries. And so, and one of the reasons, you know, why it's so much good karma to build a monastery is not only because people are practicing the Dharma and ethical conduct and developing love and compassion and so on, but in that lifetime when you build it, but because by making a physical place where people can go and practice, then you accumulate merit. You get a share of the merit that everybody in that physical place creates because you were the person that helped create it. Are you getting what I'm saying? Yeah? So it's kind of like, it's not just you build it, the merit is there, finished. But all the people who come there, as they create virtue, you get a share of that because you built it. Okay? So when Dromdonpa heard this from Lama Atisha, he went and he built Reting Monastery, which is outside of Tibet in the Pempo area. I went there when I was in Tibet, and this was almost 20 years ago. But, way out in the wilderness, a completely beautiful area. It's where Lama Tsongkhapa, Je Rinpoche, wrote the Lam Rim Chenmo. Yeah, very inspiring place. And so, also, Je Tsongkhapa, he built many monasteries, starting with Ganden Monastery. Then his students built the other ones. I'll tell you the names of the students, okay. Sakawa Nawang Drakpa. He was the one who requested Je Rinpoche to teach the 3 principal aspects of the path, the text that we recite after lunch. So he was quite wealthy, apparently. So he built 100 monasteries, and he called the 100th and last one, "Now I have finished." Yeah. And then another disciple of Je Tsongkhapa, Jamyang Chuje Tashi Pelden, and another one called Jamchen Chuje, they founded Drepung Monastery and Sera Monastery, respectively. And this year, Drepung Monastery, in Old Tibet, it had 10,000 monks in it. Now, maybe, I don't know, maybe 4,000 or 5,000, something. It's smaller in exile. But it's still operational in Tibet itself, but of course with the communists breathing down their back. Anyway, this year is Drepung Monastery's 600th anniversary. Yeah, and so when I'm there, they're going to have the festivities to celebrate 600 years. And if you stop and think about it, how many people attended Drepung Monastery at some time or another in their lives during the last 600 years? Yeah, if they had 10,000 monks, but of course, some were dying and new ones were coming, and then I'm sure they didn't start out with 10,000, but it grew very rapidly. I mean, imagine the number of people who throughout those 6 centuries went to the monastery and received so much amazing benefit. And through receiving the benefit and learning the teachings, getting a good education at Drepung, then they went back to their home monasteries, or now they're coming to the West. They're going to other places in Asia, to other countries, to spread the Dharma. And you really see the ripple effect that happens from establishing, an education center like that. Yeah. So when Geshe Wangduk, Khensa Geshe Wangduk came to the Abbey, he said that he wants us to have 10,000 monastics here. Yeah? Okay. So, yeah, there's 12 right now. Yeah. But I have a friend who's a Chinese nun, and sometimes I give teachings at her temple, and she's really very behind the Sangha. She's been incredibly helpful to us here. And she'll often talk about the benefits of a monastery, and then people will say, well, how can I help? A Buddhist educational center, how can I help? And she says, biggest thing you can do is ordain yourself. And they all go. But what she's saying is true. Yeah, what she's saying is true. Yeah, because if you get the people there that have a good education and that practice there, then you're going to have the ripple effect that's going to go far and wide. Okay. Should we do another couple of verses? Yeah. So 311. It is preferable not to create Dharma foundations that do not inspire an opulent king. In other words, create opulent Dharma foundations that inspire an opulent king. But again, he's not telling the king to do this so that other kings will be jealous, but so that other kings will be inspired and they will do the same in their own countries. Okay? So it is preferable not to create Dharma foundations that do not inspire an opulent king, because even after you die, it will not be praised. In other words, if you're a cheapskate, you build a monastery, but you're a cheapskate, people are going to criticize you, and the monastery is going to have a harder time being successful, because people aren't going to have the resources they need. That doesn't mean that you need to spoil the monastics. And, sometimes you go to monasteries that are over the top in terms of the wealth they have. And I feel in those situations that it's really the responsibility of the monastery to share their wealth with the general community. Yeah. It's interesting, different people have different ideas about this, and different monasteries have different ways of sharing. And it's an interesting thing to think about. So especially in Taiwan, where they have some absolutely enormous monasteries and temples, really lavish, huge ones. You have a lot of tourist buses coming. I imagine in Thailand it's the same, isn't it? Yeah, huge, enormous temples probably in the main cities, and then you have tourist buses coming. Yeah? And I remember visiting one of these temples. I went as a guest because I knew one of the monastics there. And I stayed overnight, and I woke up in the morning, and all these tourist buses are, driving in, and I was going, oh, wow, I don't know that I'd like to live in a place like this. But they had, I don't know how many thousands of monks there. They had a great educational program set up, and the monks and nuns took turns, being tour guides for the tourists. And their idea was that you have, you walk into the main hall, enormous, and, the statues of the 4 guardian kings, and that, you can't believe, and the temple built like a stupa and different layers of it showing different pure lands, and unbelievable. But their idea was, if you build something like this, then many people will come, even as tourists. They will see Buddhist things. It will inspire them. Maybe they'll pick up a book for free distribution. They'll learn something about Buddhism. So in that way, it benefits the public. Yeah? And I certainly can't refute that. Yeah. Personally speaking, I don't know that I would want to live in something that is like that, but I certainly can't refute the rationale behind it, because people really do benefit. In Singapore, there's the biggest monastery, Po Ming Su. Huge monastery. Tourist bus rolls up there all the time, yeah. But all over their whole campus, they have these places because they also are engaged in a project of publishing Dharma materials for free. So outside every building, there's a book rack with free distribution Dharma books. And many people who come to my classes, either in Singapore or in the West, tell me that they encountered the Dharma by being at Pong Ming Su and picking up, there's one little teeny thin book called Working with Anger, but they thought, I want that one, you know, or my husband needs it, or whatever. Yeah, but they would pick up a book for free distribution, and that's what got them interested in the Dharma. And then years later, they're coming to Dharma teachings, sometimes in Singapore, sometimes in other countries, you know? Pokasi. Oh, I said Poming Su. I meant Pokasi. Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Poming Su, I think, is quite a big, beautiful monastery too. But PKS is the that's what we used to call it. PKS, Pokasi. Yeah. So that's the big one, and yeah, quite wonderful. Mm-hmm. Thank you for correcting me. My Chinese gets mixed up. Yeah. Oh, Fokuanshan, that's in Taiwan.
Yeah.
Huge one there.
Huge tourist. But the
Yeah.
monastics, they were very, very clear that the monastic quarters where the monastics lived were very simple and separate.
Mm-hmm.
They also held that value and they kept them separate.
Yeah. So the places where they received guests, because I've been there too, carved wooden mahogany chairs, just, I mean, exquisite beyond belief. But the monastics' quarters were very, very simple. Yeah. They also have there, well, they had, when I was there, they had a elementary school, they had a high school, they had a Buddhist institute. They had a Pure Land. They constructed a Pure Land. Did you go in there? Oh, you missed it. It's like a Disneyland ride. Yeah, they construct the Pure Land. You walk through this tunnel that's kind of like the Bardo, and you emerge into this big room, and there's, offering goddesses zooming back and forth in space. There's lotus flowers. You can even stand on them, and they open. The sound of Namo Amitofo is reverberating in it. Yeah. It's incredible, and the tourists love it, but it puts some kind of good seed in their mind. Yeah. Okay. I'm not suggesting we do that here. Yeah.
Before the temple or after the temple?
Yeah.
In the temple.
I would say this morning that the Buddha will meet people where they're at.
Yes, exactly. The Buddha meets people where they're at. And this Fokuanshan also has a branch in Southern California. They have a huge restaurant there. Many people come there to eat, and also many tourist buses. But again, the idea, I think, is to just plant the seeds in people's minds. Because, when you think that, most often people are born in the lower realms, and even they're born as a human being, how many people even have the fortune to come in contact with the Dharma during their life? Very few. So, if you just plant a seed, by feeding these people good food and they're nice people, and you think, oh, Buddhism is nice, that's going to benefit you a lot in a future life. Huh? Mm-hmm.
I did want to share something about first the one about the wages and then the poorest of the poor and how
Uh-huh.
is there's an experience I had in the Abbey when we first started doing thinning projects in the forest. It's this whole idea about people donating to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha rather than having a business transaction.
Mm-hmm.
And at first we were putting the ads in the paper, and I wanted to put a number on how much a quarter would cost. So that when people come, they give me money like a business transaction, give them wood. And then it would say, we want to do this by donation. And so what what happened in the first few years is that people came and they brought apple pies, they brought carrots from their gardens, they brought little things, they were all that they had. You know, a lot of them are Abbey families. And it was, I finally got in my head that the virtue they were creating by making an offering rather than having a business transaction, creating the karma to meet the Buddha Dharma in the future.
Mhm.
These are, you know, Gulf War vets, people that are just poor all over the county that would never meet the Buddha Dharma except for this ad in the paper for donating firewood by donation. So it really instilled in me the sense that everything here is offered freely and that the dana is an offering of generosity rather than a business transaction. But we all get to benefit by making offerings to the Buddha Dharma Fund. And that really made such a huge imprint in my mind that year. I've never forgot people coming up in their little trailers and vans and with their kids and their grandpas and filling up the wood and giving us like some potatoes.
Yeah.
It's really a beautiful exchange.
Yeah. Yeah. And remember there was one lady, we gave her, she didn't have much, and then the next year we went to the dump, she was working for the dump, and she helped us out. Yeah, and she remembered us, you know, because we had given her the wood. So. Okay. Other questions, comments? Oh.
At the full ordination in Taiwan, we kept receiving objects, right, like bags, clothes, and they kept calling them objects to create a karmic connection in Chinese. They really keep.
Yeah.
It shifts your mind too as a monastic, like, wow, there are all these people just wanting to connect.
Yeah.
The newly ordained people, the responsibility was heavy.
Yeah, because they really are respecting, you know, the precepts, so they want to make a connection with people who are taking the precepts, yeah. And then we have responsibility on our side. Mm-hmm.
Can you elaborate on the generosity brings you future wealth? Is it primarily material wealth or is it other wealth as well?
It depends on the kind of generosity that you give. It depends on how you dedicate it. It's always better to dedicate it for the enlightenment of all beings, and then as a byproduct for that, then you get wealth in your next life. If you dedicate it just for wealth in the next life, the karma ripens that way and not for enlightenment. So you always dedicate really big. But I think, you know, I mean, in one way it makes sense. You give materially, you receive materially. You give protection and fearlessness, that's what you receive. But I can also imagine that it's not, you know, necessarily so stringently rigid like that. Yeah, that just the heart that wants to give itself is yeah, in fact, you know, it's got to be that that it's not just the same kind, okay? Because they always say that for monastics, our generosity should be the generosity of the Dharma, but yet, you know, in future lives, then we receive material things in order to be able to live. So it's got to be not just you give the Dharma and you receive the Dharma, but it, you know, it comes back in numerous ways. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I had a question about giving to groups. You said that there's the possibility there might be an Arya or a Bodhisattva group.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, well, could be none of that in the group. One of those people may become that, and you may have still made a karmic connection.
Yeah.
You might be giving to newly ordained monastics,
Mm-hmm.
and eons later, when that person does become an Arya, then there's a karmic connection.
Yeah.
The other thought was,
Mhm.
if you offer to, say you offer to eat at 30,000 people and only 2,000 take you up on it, the vastness of the offering is more than if you just offered to 2,000
Yeah,
people.
yeah, yeah. I mean, everybody, when I've been places that when they offer food, everybody, especially in Theravada countries, you know, like 20 people will offer food and there's 20 dishes on the table and they want you to take a spoonful from each dish. Yeah? Because you know, I want to be able to donate to you and make sure that, you know, there's that common connection made with you. And if you don't take a spoon from every dish, maybe because some of the things don't go with your stomach very well, they will insist you do anyway.
The offering makes the common connection even if you don't, doesn't it?
Yes, but human beings, you know, it's like you've got to taste my curry that has 15 chilies in it and it's going to burn you all the way down. But you've got to taste it. Yeah. Uh-huh.
So I have a question about generosity in terms of generating a generous mind, no matter how much actual resources you have to offer.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I especially think if you live in a culture that counts so much about the amount as opposed to the mind,
Mm-hmm.
just what are some ways to really get that out of your mind? Just
It's to build up your motivation of why you want to give. Yeah? To stop thinking the way our culture does, which is the person who gives 2 million is the generous person, and the person who gives 20 is the cheapskate. To realize that that's completely false. Yeah? That the guy who gives 2 million could be doing it for ego benefit, and the guy who gives it for 20, who gives 20, it could really be doing it because he wants to give. Yeah, and so to get that out of your mind, that it's not the amount, it's the motivation.
it's like feeling that. So even if they know they intellectually believe that intellectually, it's still getting rid of that feeling.
Yeah, so like everything,
Practice, practice, practice.
you got it. Practice, familiarity. Yeah. And so even, you know, one thing that you can do is even when you are, like if you're passing out papers, to think, I'm being generous. Or you're passing the ketchup, think, I'm being generous. So every time there's some kind of action or service like that, think, you know, oh, I'm able to benefit, I'm able to give. And so then it just reinforces that taking delight in giving. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I just want to share, when I was in Nepal, I was doing a retreat, and there were a group of us lay people with the monastics as well.
Mm-hmm.
And when the villagers heard that, you know, there are people doing retreat, they are so poor, these villagers, they came and they gave us lay people money, offered money to us.
Mm.
And, you know, as a lay person, you know, for me, I'm more like a tourist. I was like, why are they giving me money, you know, because they're so poor. But, you know, it's so beautiful, you know, they come with no shoes, nothing, and they just offer, whether it's 1 rupee or 10 rupees. So I asked the monk, you know, why are they giving that money? Because we're not monastic.
Mm-hmm.
But they say they believe that one day you might get enlightened. That
Mm-hmm.
they are now making the connection with you because they just want to support you in the Dharma. I thought that was so beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a beautiful intention. Very beautiful. Mm-hmm.
This goes into the same direction. The Bodhisattva precepts we took in Taiwan, according to the Brahmana Sutta, precept 28 is issuing discriminatory invitations, so being generous to monks and nuns. Can I read that to make it clear what's about?
Mm-hmm.
A disciple of the Buddha, be he a bodhisattva monk, lay bodhisattva, or other donor, should, when inviting monks or nuns to conduct a prayer session, come to the temple and inform the monk in charge. The monk will then tell him inviting members of the Sangha according to the proper order is tantamount to inviting the arhats of the 10 directions. To offer a discriminatory special invitation to such a worthy group as 500 arhats or bodhisattva monks will not generate as much merit as inviting one ordinary monk if it's his turn. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So the way the Buddha set up the Sangha is everybody's equal. Yeah. In terms of sharing the resources. Yeah. So whether you're highly realized, whether you're senior, whether you're junior, in terms of sharing the resources, everybody shares equally. Certain people don't get more and other people less. Certain people don't get better and other people worse. Yeah, so it was the custom for people, lay people, to go to the monastery, and there were too many people, too many monastics to invite everybody, so they would invite a certain number of monastics to come to their home, and they would offer lunch. They would offer lunch dana, and you were supposed, the Sangha, because in order to share the resources equally, everybody went in ordination order. Yeah, so if somebody invites 5 monks, the first 5 monks go, then the next day somebody invites 5 monks. It's not the same 5 monks, it's the next 5 monks down the line. And so that way everybody is equal, everybody shares, and there's no discriminatory invitations. Because also it isn't good for the lay people to say, well, there's a certain monk or nun that I really like, I want to invite them to my house, but there's another one I don't like, and I don't want to give them any food. That's not so nice. So, it's like you go in ordination order, and however many they request, that's what they get. Okay. Last question?
Kind of a big question you might not want to answer right now, but since the Sravasti Abbey is fairly new to me, when you began the Sravasti Abbey, did you think you would be here? And do you have like a vision of what's going to happen here at Sravasti Abbey? And when I asked that question about how many years did they give you? Did he think it would take you to have that many?
To have 10,000? He didn't set a deadline. Yeah. When we started, we were basically just looking for land, and looked around southern Idaho, couldn't find what fit, made offers on a couple of properties, but they were turned down, thank goodness. And then we managed to find this one. Actually, tomorrow, maybe in the after lunch, we have some videos that kind of tell the history of the Abbey. Maybe we can play them, and you can watch. Anyway, we wound up finding this property here, and initial residents were me and 2 cats. Yeah, and I had a vision of what I wanted to do, but also, so much of what happens depends on who shows up. It's not one person's karma, it's not one person's decision. You have a vision, you have some ideas, but it depends on who comes and wants to live there, and who wants to be part of the larger community, and who has which kind of talents, and so you never know exactly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you have that vision, but then your vision also grows and changes according to the circumstances, the conditions.
So what surprised you about how it is now compared to when you were living here with your 2 cats?
That it even exists. Because I remember very clearly sitting in that building there in the large front room, because we had to take out the people who own the property were very kind, and the mortgage was with them because banks don't want to loan money to religious institutions. So Harold very kindly carried the mortgage. But we had to pay over $1,700 each month on the mortgage. And I remember sitting there with the two cats and saying, where is $1,700 going to come from every month to pay this mortgage? Where in the world is that going to come from? I don't know where it came from, but it came from, not from one wealthy benefactor, but from a lot of people giving what they could because they liked the idea of what we were doing. Yeah? So... Yeah. Yeah. So I said, all I can do is my best. Hopefully, I believe what the Buddha said, and that's why I didn't go out and get a job. Yeah. And then apparently, something worked. Mary Grace?
I did believe that, you started this series tonight talking about aspirations, and I'm not sure that this is where it started, but remembering 20 years ago at, the conference, like in the Western Buddhist Nun.
Yeah.
And, you had this vision, and here it is.
Yeah.
More than maybe you might imagine, but
Yeah.
you had a big vision.
Yeah. Yeah, there was definitely the vision, but as to how to make it happen, I could not even imagine. There was no way at that time to even imagine how it would happen. But it happened. And I'm so glad all of you were able to come here and benefit from the place. Yeah.